They said she was nothing, a beggar in silk, a ghost sold to a man who couldn't love. But when the fever came, when death clawed at the iron gates of Hale Manor and every soul fled in terror, Clara Whitmore stayed. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She fought. This is the story of a woman who walked into a marriage colder than winter steel, who turned a transaction into a war, and who proved that survival isn't about what you're given, it's about what you refuse to lose. Stay until the end. Like this video. Comment which city you're watching from. The carriage rattled over frozen mud and broken stone, each jolt sending Clara Whitmore's spine against the hard wooden bench. Outside, the world was gray. Endless plains swallowed by fog, skeletal trees clawing at a sky that couldn't decide between rain and snow. This wasn't the green countryside of her childhood. This was the frontier. Raw, unforgiving. A place where the week didn't last a season. Clara pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the smudge of civilization grow larger on the horizon. Ironhaven. The name alone told you everything you needed to know. Not a city, not really. More like a wound torn into the earth, bleeding smoke and ambition. Factories lined the riverbanks like jagged teeth. The air would taste like coal and rust. She'd been warned. She'd also been sold. Not in those words, of course. Her uncle had dressed it up nicely. A marriage of opportunity, he'd called it. Securing your future. But Clara knew the truth. Her father's debts had destroyed them. The estate was gone. The servants dismissed. Her mother lay dying in a rented room 3 towns away, coughing blood into handkerchiefs Clara could no longer afford to replace. So when Marcus Hale's offer came, wealth, security, a name that carried weight even in places where nothing else did, her uncle had signed the papers before Clara could finish reading them. She was 23 years old. She'd been engaged once before to a kind man with soft hands and a gentle smile. He died of pneumonia 2 winters ago. After that, the proposals stopped. A woman past 20 with no dowry and a family name soaked in scandal wasn't worth much on the marriage market. Until Marcus Hale decided otherwise. Clara had never met him. She'd only heard the stories. He was 37, owned half the rail lines cutting through the western frontier, and most of the coal mines fueling them, self-made, ruthless, brilliant. Men feared him. Women whispered about him at garden parties, dangerous, cold, untouchable. He'd been married once, years ago. His wife had died in childbirth. The baby hadn't survived either. After that, Marcus Hale became a ghost in his own life. He built his empire, expanded his holdings, crushed competitors without hesitation. But he never remarried, never courted, never smiled. Until 3 months ago, when he sent a letter to Clara's uncle. The terms were simple: marriage, in name only. She would live in his manor, manage his household, represent his name at necessary functions. In return, her mother's medical care would be paid for, her family's debts erased. There was no mention of love, no pretense of affection. It was a business arrangement, nothing more. Clara had accepted because she had no choice, but she'd made herself a promise the moment she signed her name. She would not break. She would not become invisible. Whatever Marcus Hale expected from this arrangement, she would survive it on her own terms. The carriage slowed. Clara straightened, smoothing the travel wrinkles from her dark green dress. It was the nicest thing she owned now, purchased with the small advance Hale's solicitor had sent. Practical, elegant, expensive enough to avoid embarrassment, but not so lavish as to seem presumptuous. She'd chosen it carefully. First impressions mattered, especially when you were entering a life where you had no power. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting. A footman in black livery extended his hand. Clara took it, stepped down onto gravel, and looked up. Hale Manor rose before her like a fortress. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't meant to be. The house was all hard angles and dark stone, 3 stories of uncompromising architecture built to withstand wind, cold, and time. Iron gates, tall windows like watchful eyes, gardens that might have been elegant once but were now overgrown, tangled, forgotten. This was a place designed for function, not comfort, a place where beauty had been sacrificed for strength. Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. The footman gestured toward the entrance. "This way, ma'am." She followed him up the stone steps, her heels clicking sharply against the cold surface. The front doors opened before she reached them. Massive oak panels reinforced with iron bands swinging inward to reveal a cavernous entry hall. Inside, the air was warmer but no softer. Dark wood paneling, high ceilings, a grand staircase sweeping upward into shadow. Everything was clean, well-maintained, and utterly devoid of warmth. No flowers, no personal touches, just order and control. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform approached, middle-aged, stern-faced, her hands folded precisely at her waist. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her tone correct but distant. "I am Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper. Mr. Hale is expecting you in his study. Not welcome, not how was your journey, just efficiency." Clara nodded. "Thank you." Mrs. Brennan turned without another word and led her down a hallway lined with portraits of men Clara didn't recognize, ancestors probably, or business partners. It was hard to tell. Their painted eyes seemed to track her as she walked, measuring, judging. She kept her chin up. The study door was already open. Marcus Hale stood with his back to the entrance, staring out a tall window that overlooked the rear grounds. He didn't turn when Clara entered, didn't acknowledge her at all. Mrs. Brennan cleared her throat. "Sir, Mrs. Whitmore has arrived." "Leave us," Hale said. His voice was exactly what Clara had expected. Low, clipped, devoid of warmth. A voice used to giving orders and having them obeyed instantly. Mrs. Brennan departed, closing the door behind her. Clara stood just inside the study, waiting. She studied the room while he continued ignoring her. More dark wood. Shelves lined with ledgers, maps, legal documents. A massive desk covered in correspondence and contracts. Everything precise, everything controlled. Finally, Marcus Hale turned. Clara's breath caught. Not from attraction, but from the sheer force of his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. No jacket, no pretense of softness. His face was all hard lines, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, eyes the color of slate. Handsome, yes, but in the way a blade was handsome. Functional, dangerous, and completely empty of warmth. He looked at her the way a man might assess a horse at auction, measuring, calculating. "You're younger than I expected," he said flatly. Clara lifted her chin. "I'm 23. Your solicitor had my age in the contract." "I didn't read that part closely." He moved to his desk, poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one, and set them both down. He took one, left the other untouched. "Sit." It wasn't an invitation. Clara sat in the chair across from him, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't reach for the whiskey. Marcus leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Let me be clear about what this arrangement is and isn't, Mrs. Whitmore." "Miss Whitmore," she corrected quietly. "Until the ceremony." His eyes narrowed slightly. "The ceremony is tomorrow. After that, you'll be Mrs. Hale. The name comes with expectations." "I understand." "Do you?" He studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. "This is not a marriage. This is a contract. You will manage the household, attend necessary social functions, and maintain the appearance of respectability. In return, your mother's care is covered, your family's debts erased. You'll have security, comfort, freedom to live as you wish within these walls." "But not as your wife," Clara said evenly. "No." His tone left no room for negotiation. "I have no interest in companionship. I have no need for affection. I will not share your bed, your confidence, or your time beyond what appearances require. You will have your own rooms, your own life. We will be civil strangers under the same roof." Clara absorbed this without flinching. She'd expected it. The contract had been explicit, but hearing him say it, hearing the absolute coldness in his voice, was different than reading words on paper. "And if I want more?" she asked, surprising herself. Marcus's expression didn't change. "Then you've misunderstood the arrangement. I don't offer more. I don't have more to give." Silence stretched between them. Clara leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Hale, I didn't come here expecting love. I came here because I had no other choice. My mother is dying. My family is ruined. You offered survival. I accepted. But if you think I'm going to spend the rest of my life being invisible, playing the silent, obedient decoration in your cold house, you've misunderstood me." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, not warmth, interest, maybe surprise. Go on, he said quietly. I will honor the terms of our agreement, Clara continued, her voice steady. I will manage your household. I will represent your name with dignity. I will not embarrass you or demand what you're unwilling to give. But I will not disappear. I will not be erased. If I'm going to live here, I will live here. Not as your wife, perhaps, but as myself. Marcus was silent for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he straightened, picked up the second glass of whiskey, and held it out to her. You have spine, he said. That's unexpected. Clara took the glass. Their fingers didn't touch. You'll need it, Marcus added, his tone shifting back to business. This house is not kind. The people who work here are loyal to me, not you. The society matrons in Ironhaven will tear you apart the first chance they get. My cousin Richard will try to undermine you. He expected to inherit everything before I remarried. And the land beyond these gates is brutal. Winter here kills the weak. Then it's fortunate I'm not weak, Clara said quietly. Marcus's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. We'll see. He moved to the door, opened it. The conversation was over. Clara stood, set the untouched whiskey back on his desk, and walked toward the hallway. Mrs. Whitmore. She stopped, turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The ceremony is at 10 tomorrow morning. Small, private, no guests. After that, you're free to do as you wish. Just don't expect anything from me. Clara met his gaze without wavering. I don't, Mr. Hale, but don't expect me to need it. She walked out, head high, heart pounding. Behind her, she heard the study door close with a quiet, final click. The wedding was exactly as promised. Small, cold, transactional. No flowers, no music, no warmth. Just Clara in a simple ivory dress, Marcus in a dark suit, and a magistrate who read the vows in a monotone while Mrs. Brennan and 2 servants bore witness. The whole affair took less than 15 minutes. When the magistrate pronounced them married, Marcus didn't kiss her. He simply signed the register, handed her the pen, and walked out. Clara stood alone in the parlor, staring at her new name written in ink that hadn't dried yet. Mrs. Clara Hale. It looked like a lie. That night she lay in her new rooms, spacious, well-appointed, utterly impersonal, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, Marcus was in his own quarters. She'd been told he kept late hours, worked through the night, rarely slept more than 4 hours. She wondered if he was thinking about her at all. Probably not. Clara turned onto her side, pulled the heavy quilt up to her chin, and made herself a second promise. She would not spend her life waiting for this man to notice her. If Marcus Hale wanted distance, she'd give it to him. But she would carve out her own place in this cold world. She would find her own purpose. And if he ever decided to look up from his ledgers and see her, she would make sure he saw someone worth seeing. The first week was silence. Marcus left early, returned late, and avoided her entirely. Meals were taken separately, conversations non-existent. Clara saw him only in passing, a figure disappearing into his study, a shadow on the stairs. Fine. Clara turned her attention to the house. It was a mess, she discovered. Not physically. Mrs. Brennan ran a tight operation, but structurally. The household accounts were chaotic. Servants were overpaid in some areas, underpaid in others. Supplies were ordered haphazardly. The winter stores were insufficient. Clara spent 3 days reviewing every ledger, every contract, every receipt. Then she called Mrs. Brennan into the sitting room. The housekeeper arrived with visible skepticism. Ma'am? Clara handed her a revised budget. I've reorganized the household expenditures. We're wasting money on duplicate orders and poor vendor contracts. This should save 15% annually without cutting quality. Mrs. Brennan stared at the document, her expression shifting from dismissive to surprised. You did this yourself? Yes. I also noticed the staff schedule is inefficient. If we rotate duties differently, we can reduce overtime costs and improve morale. Clara met her gaze steadily. I'm not here to interfere with your work, Mrs. Brennan. I'm here to support it, but I won't sit idle either. The housekeeper's mouth thinned, then slowly she nodded. I'll review this. Thank you. It was a small victory, but victories were built one step at a time. 2 weeks in, Clara found the garden. It was behind the manor, hidden beyond an overgrown hedge and a rusted iron gate. She'd been exploring the grounds, desperate for air, for space, for anything beyond the suffocating walls, when she stumbled across it. The garden was a ruin. Once, it must have been beautiful. Clara could see the bones of it beneath the weeds, stone pathways, a central fountain long dry, carefully planned beds now choked with brambles. Someone had loved this place, poured time and care into it, and then abandoned it completely. Clara pushed through the gate, her skirts catching on thorns. She didn't care. She spent the entire afternoon there, pulling weeds, clearing pathways, uncovering what had been lost. Her hands blistered, her dress got filthy. She didn't stop. When the sun began to set, she stepped back and looked at what she'd uncovered. It wasn't much, but it was something. She returned the next day, and the day after that. On the fourth day, she found a gardener, a grizzled old man named Tom who worked the manor's vegetable plots. "Tom," she called, "can you help me with something?" He looked up, suspicious. "What?" "The garden behind the hedge. I want to restore it." Tom's expression darkened. "That garden's been dead 10 years, ma'am. Mr. Hale doesn't want it touched." "Did he say that explicitly?" "Didn't have to. After his wife died, he had it locked up. No one goes back there." Clara absorbed this. "His wife planted it?" Tom nodded slowly. "Every flower, every stone. It was her place." Clara looked back toward the hidden gate. "Then it deserves better than rot." "Ma'am, I'm not asking permission, Tom. I'm asking for help. Will you give it?" The old man studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "You're stubborn." "Yes. You'll get yourself in trouble." "Probably." Tom shook his head, but she saw the corner of his mouth lift. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you." They worked together every afternoon. Slowly, the garden came back to life. Clara didn't tell Marcus. She didn't ask. She just kept working. Bob. 3 weeks in, Richard Hale arrived. Clara was in the parlor reviewing menus when Mrs. Brennan announced him. "Mr. Richard Hale to see you, ma'am." Clara looked up. "Marcus isn't here." "He asked for you." "Interesting." Richard swept in before Clara could respond. Tall, blonde, charming in the way snakes were charming. He wore an expensive coat, carried a silver-topped cane, and smiled like a man used to getting his way. "Mrs. Hale," he said smoothly, bowing with theatrical flourish. "At last. My cousin has been hiding you." Clara stood, keeping her expression neutral. "Mr. Hale, I wasn't aware we were expected to meet." "We weren't." Richard circled her slowly, assessing. "But I was curious. Marcus marries out of nowhere, brings home a complete stranger, refuses to explain himself. Naturally, I had to see what kind of woman could accomplish such a feat." "It wasn't a feat. It was a contract." Richard laughed. "How delightfully blunt. I like you already." He didn't. Clara could see it in his eyes. The calculation, the contempt barely masked by charm. "What can I do for you, Mr. Hale?" she asked coolly. "Richard, please. We're family now." He settled into a chair without invitation. "I simply wanted to welcome you, and perhaps offer some advice." "I didn't ask for advice." "No, but you need it?" Richard leaned forward, his smile sharpening. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work. Marcus is a difficult man, cold, obsessed with control. He'll use you for appearances and discard you the moment you're no longer useful. Unless, of course, you're smart enough to secure your own position." Clara sat across from him, hands folded. "And how would I do that?" "By being practical. By recognizing that Marcus has priorities that don't include you. But I could be a friend, an ally. Someone who looks out for your interests when he doesn't." There it was. "The play." Clara smiled politely. "That's very kind. But I don't need an ally, Richard. I need you to leave." His expression froze. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Clara stood, moved to the door, opened it. "Thank you for the visit. Don't come back uninvited." Richard stared at her, shock giving way to cold anger. He rose slowly, adjusted his coat. "You're making a mistake." "Perhaps. But it's my mistake to make." He walked to the door, stopped just beside her. "You think Marcus will protect you? He won't. He doesn't care enough." "Good thing I don't need protection then." Richard's jaw tightened. Then he laughed, sharp, humorless. You really are a fool. He left. Clara closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. Her hands were shaking. Chad. That night, Marcus came to her sitting room. It was the first time he'd sought her out since the wedding. Clara looked up from her book, startled. Mr. Hale. He stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, expression unreadable. Richard was here. Yes. What did he want? Clara considered lying, decided against it. To undermine me. And you, by extension. Marcus didn't look surprised. What did you tell him? To leave. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, his posture shifted. Not quite relaxed. He was incapable of that, but less guarded. Good, he said quietly. He turned to leave. Mr. Hale. He stopped. Clara set her book aside. Why did you marry me? The real reason. Marcus looked back at her, his expression carefully blank. I told you. Appearances. That's not the whole truth. It's all you need to know. Is it? Clara stood, moving closer. Not close enough to threaten, but close enough to matter. Because if this arrangement is going to work, I need to understand what I'm part of. Richard clearly thinks I'm a threat. Mrs. Brennan barely trusts me. The servants whisper. And you act like I don't exist except when it's convenient. Marcus's jaw tightened. You knew what this was. I did, but I also know when I'm being used as a pawn in a game I don't understand. So tell me, what am I really doing here? For a heartbeat, she thought he might answer, might let something slip past the iron control he wore like armor. Instead, he stepped back. You're here because I needed a wife and you needed security. That's all. Don't look for complexity where there isn't any. Liar. The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Marcus stared at her, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Careful, Mrs. Hale. Or what? Clara didn't retreat. You'll send me away? Break the contract? We both know you won't. You need me here. I just don't know why yet. Silence. Heavy. Electric. Then Marcus turned and walked out without another word. Clara stood alone in the sitting room, heart racing, hands steady. She'd drawn first blood. Now the real war could begin. The next morning, Clara woke to find a note slipped under her door. No signature, just 2 words in sharp, angular handwriting, "Stop gardening." She crumpled it without hesitation and threw it in the fire. By noon, she was back in the hidden garden, dirt under her fingernails, sweat dampening her collar despite the autumn chill. Tom worked beside her in silence, clearing the last of the dead vines from what had once been a rose arbor. The old man didn't ask about the note. He didn't need to. He'll be angry, Tom said finally, his voice low. He already is. Clara yanked a stubborn root free, tossed it onto the growing pile of debris. Anger I can work with. Indifference is worse. Tom grunted, something that might have been agreement. His wife used to say the same thing. Clara paused, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. What was she like? The gardener's weathered face softened, just slightly. Kind, gentle, everything he wasn't. She believed she could fix him, make him softer. He shook his head, broke her heart trying, then broke her body bringing his child into the world. Neither of them survived it. The weight of that truth settled over the garden like fog. He loved her, Clara said quietly. It wasn't a question. In his way, which wasn't enough. Tom met her eyes. You're different, though. You don't want to fix him. You just want to survive him. Is that so wrong? No, ma'am. It's smart. Just don't mistake smart for safe. Clara returned to her work, Tom's words echoing in her mind. She wasn't trying to fix Marcus Hale. She wasn't naive enough to believe a man that broken could be repaired by force of will or gentle persistence. But she also refused to let his grief turn her into a ghost. This garden had been abandoned because it reminded him of loss. Well, Clara understood loss too. The difference was she refused to let it consume her. If Marcus wanted to stay trapped in his past, that was his choice. She was building a future. 3 hours later, when the sun began its descent and her muscles screamed for rest, Clara stood in the center of the cleared space and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The fountain still didn't work. That would take a stonemason. But the pathways were visible now, the beds outlined, the arbor standing clean and strong. It was beginning to look like something worth saving. She didn't hear Marcus approach until he spoke. "I told you to stop." Clara turned, keeping her expression calm despite the jolt of surprise. Marcus stood at the garden's entrance, still in his work clothes, his face carved from stone. Behind him, the manor loomed dark against the dimming sky. "You sent a note," Clara corrected. "You didn't tell me anything." The note was clear enough. It was also unsigned. For all I knew, it could have been from Richard or Mrs. Brennan, or anyone else who thinks I should spend my days sitting quietly in a parlor doing needlepoint. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me." "I'm not playing anything, Mr. Hale. I'm restoring a garden that's been neglected for a decade. If that offends you, you're welcome to explain why instead of sending anonymous notes like a coward." The word landed like a slap. Marcus moved forward, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't touch her, but his presence alone was enough to make her pulse spike. Up close, she could see the tight control in every line of his face. The clenched jaw, the rigid shoulders, the barely leashed fury in his slate-gray eyes. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Then enlighten me." This garden was hers, my wife's. Every stone, every flower, every goddamn path, she planned it, planted it, poured herself into it. And when she died, I locked it away because I couldn't stand looking at something that beautiful when she was rotting in the ground. Do you understand? This place is a grave, and you're desecrating it. Clara held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "No, I'm honoring it. There's a difference. You have no right. I have every right. You married me. You gave me this house, this life, this name. You don't get to decide which parts of it I'm allowed to touch." She stepped closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its steel. "Your wife built something beautiful here. She put her heart into it, and you let it die because you couldn't handle the pain of remembering her. That's not honor, Mr. Hale. That's cowardice." For a heartbeat, she thought he might strike her, or shout, or do something, anything, to break the terrible tension crackling between them. Instead, Marcus turned and walked away without another word. Clara stood alone in the garden, her hands shaking, her heart pounding against her ribs. She'd crossed a line. She knew it. But she wasn't sorry. The war between them had just begun, and Clara had no intention of losing. That night, the household felt different. Clara sensed it the moment she entered the dining room for supper. Mrs. Brennan's usual cool efficiency had sharpened into something colder, more hostile. The footman who served her meal avoided eye contact. Even the maid who turned down her bed later moved with stiff, mechanical precision, as though touching Clara's belongings might contaminate her. Word had spread. The new Mrs. Hale had defied the master, disrespected his dead wife's memory, overstepped her bounds. They were waiting to see how he would punish her. Clara ate her meal in silence, back straight, expression serene. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled, but when she retired to her sitting room and closed the door behind her, she let out a long, shaky breath. This was going to get worse before it got better. She was proven right the next morning when she found the garden gate locked with a heavy iron chain. Clara stared at it for a long moment, her fingers curling around the cold metal. The message was clear. Marcus had drawn his line. She was not to cross it. Fine. She would find another way. Clara spent the morning in the manor's library, a vast, underused room filled with books no one had touched in years. She pulled volumes on horticulture, landscaping, estate management. She made notes, drew plans, calculated costs. If Marcus thought a lock would stop her, he didn't know her at all. At lunch, Mrs. Brennan delivered another blow. "Ma'am," the housekeeper said, her tone precisely neutral, "Mr. Hale has requested that you attend the mayor's reception next Saturday. As his wife, your presence is required." Clara set down her tea. "Of course. What's the occasion?" "The mayor is announcing a new railway expansion. Mr. Hale is the primary investor. There will be speeches, introductions, and—" Mrs. Brennan paused, her mouth thinning. "Scrutiny. Scrutiny. Ironhaven society is particular about who they accept. You'll be judged, ma'am, harshly. I suggest you prepare accordingly." It was the closest thing to a warning Clara had received from the woman. She appreciated it even if it was wrapped in ice. Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. I'll be ready. The housekeeper nodded curtly and left. Clara sat alone in the dining room, staring at the cold remains of her meal. She'd known this was coming. A contract marriage to a man like Marcus Hale came with social obligations. She would be paraded in front of Ironhaven's elite, inspected like livestock, and judged on everything from her dress to her manners to the way she held her teacup. They would be looking for weakness, for proof that she didn't belong. Clara intended to disappoint them. She spent the next 3 days preparing. She reviewed etiquette books she'd read years ago, practiced conversation topics that were safe and neutral, and worked with the Manor's seamstress to alter the one formal gown she'd brought with her, a deep burgundy silk that had been her mother's, elegant but outdated. The seamstress, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, worked wonders. She updated the neckline, added new lace at the sleeves, and took in the waist to fit Clara's slimmer frame. "You'll do," Margaret said when Clara tried it on for the final fitting. "They'll tear you apart anyway, but at least you won't give them ammunition." "Encouraging," Clara said dryly. Margaret smiled, the first genuine warmth Clara had seen from any of the staff. "You've got spine, ma'am. More than the last one did, rest her soul. Just watch yourself. Society women are vipers, and Richard Hale has friends among them." Clara's stomach tightened. "What kind of friends?" "The kind who whisper, who spread rumors, who can destroy a reputation in a single afternoon tea." Margaret pinned the final alteration, stepped back. "He's been telling people you're a gold digger, that you trapped Mr. Hale with debts and desperation, that you're unsuitable, common, manipulative." The words hit like physical blows, but Clara kept her expression neutral. "And do people believe him?" "Some do. Some are waiting to see for themselves." Margaret met her eyes in the mirror. "Prove him wrong, ma'am. It's the only way to survive." Clara nodded slowly. "I intend to." Saturday arrived wrapped in frost and fog. Clara dressed carefully, every detail deliberate. The burgundy gown fit perfectly, elegant without being ostentatious. Her hair was swept up in a simple style. No elaborate curls or fashionable excess, just clean lines and quiet dignity. A single strand of pearls at her throat, her mother's. No other jewelry. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who belonged, not because of wealth or lineage, but because of sheer, unshakable composure. Good enough. Marcus was waiting in the entrance hall when she descended the stairs. He wore a black suit, perfectly tailored, his expression as unreadable as ever. But when Clara reached the bottom step, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or approval. It vanished before she could be sure. "You're ready," he said. Not a question. "Yes." He offered his arm with mechanical precision. Clara took it, and together they walked to the waiting carriage. The ride to the mayor's residence was silent. Marcus stared out the window, lost in whatever calculations filled his mind. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap, her breathing steady. She could do this. She'd survived worse. When the carriage stopped, Marcus turned to her. "Listen carefully. These people are not your friends. They will smile, compliment you, and then destroy you the moment you leave the room. Trust no one. Say as little as possible. And do not, under any circumstances, let them see you rattled." Clara met his gaze. "Is that what you think of me? That I'll crumble under a little scrutiny? I think you're untested, and these people eat the untested alive. Then I suppose we'll find out what I'm made of." Something almost like respect crossed Marcus's face. Then he stepped out of the carriage and extended his hand. Clara took it and stepped into the lion's den. The mayor's residence was everything Ironhaven aspired to be. Grand, opulent, dripping with new money and industrial ambition. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, gilt-framed mirrors reflecting a sea of elegantly dressed guests. Clara felt their eyes on her the moment she entered. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Marcus's hand tightened fractionally on her arm, a warning, or perhaps reassurance. Then he led her forward, his expression carved from ice. "Hale!" A portly man in an expensive suit approached, hand extended. "Good to see you, and this must be the new Mrs. Hale." "Indeed." Marcus's tone was clipped. "Clara, this is Mayor Carver." Clara smiled politely. "A pleasure, Mayor." Carver's eyes raked over her with barely concealed assessment. "Charming, absolutely charming.
We'd heard rumors, of course, but seeing you in person, well, you're quite the surprise.
I hope a pleasant one, Clara said smoothly.
Time will tell, won't it?
Carver's smile didn't reach his eyes.
Excuse me. Duty calls.
He moved away, already whispering to another gentleman. Clara's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression serene. It was going to be a long night. For the next hour, Marcus introduced her to a parade of faces. Businessmen, investors, their wives, their daughters. Each one smiled. Each one judged. And with every introduction, Clara felt the weight of their collective skepticism pressing down on her. She was too young, too unknown, too clearly out of her depth. But she didn't falter. She answered questions with polite brevity, deflected probing inquiries with practiced grace, and refused to give them the reaction they were hunting for. Then Richard arrived. He swept into the reception like a conquering hero, charm turned to maximum wattage, shaking hands and kissing cheeks with theatrical warmth. When he spotted Clara, his smile sharpened. "Cousin!" He approached with open arms as though they were old friends. "And my new cousin-in-law. How lovely to see you both." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Richard." "You look radiant, Clara." Richard took her hand, kissed it with exaggerated flourish. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." Clara withdrew her hand smoothly. "Thank you. I was just telling Mrs. Mrs. Hale, about your whirlwind courtship," Richard said to Marcus, his tone dripping with false warmth. "Such a romantic story. Love at first sight, was it?" "Hardly," Marcus said coldly. Richard laughed. "Of course not. You've never been the romantic type, have you, cousin? Always so practical." He turned to Clara, eyes glinting. "I do hope you knew what you were getting into, my dear. Marcus is a difficult man to please." "I'm not trying to please him," Clara said evenly. "I'm trying to build a life." "There's a difference." Richard's smile faltered, just for a second. Then he recovered. "How refreshingly honest. I like that about you, Clara. You don't pretend." "Why would I?" "Indeed. Why would you?" Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that Marcus had to strain to hear. "Just remember, honesty can be dangerous in places like this. People prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths." "Then they'll be disappointed in me," Clara said. Richard's eyes hardened, but before he could respond, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Marcus Hale, you absolute beast, hiding your bride away like some kind of secret." A stunning woman in emerald silk approached, all calculated grace and dangerous beauty. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that missed nothing. Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Vivian." "Don't Vivian me." The woman turned to Clara, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Vivian Ashford, old friend of your husband's, and clearly the only one brave enough to actually welcome you properly." Clara shook her hand, immediately wary. Vivian's smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "Thank you. That's very kind." "Not kind. Curious." Vivian linked her arm through Clara's, steering her away from Marcus and Richard with practiced ease. "Come, let's get you away from the wolves for a moment. You look like you could use a drink." Clara glanced back at Marcus. He gave the slightest nod, permission or perhaps a test. She let Vivian lead her toward the refreshment table. "Don't mind Richard," Vivian said, accepting 2 glasses of champagne and handing one to Clara. "He's been bitter since Marcus cut him out of the business 5 years ago. Now he spends his days playing society darling and spreading poison wherever he goes." "I noticed." Vivian laughed, low and genuine. "I like you already." Most women Marcus brings around are either terrified of him or desperately trying to change him. You seem different. "I'm not trying to change anyone. I'm just trying to survive." "Smart." Vivian sipped her champagne, studying Clara over the rim. "But survival here requires more than just keeping your head down. You need allies, information, protection. And you're offering all 3? Maybe, if you're worth the investment." Vivian's smile turned calculating. "Marcus is a complicated man, powerful, brilliant, completely emotionally closed off. His first wife tried to crack that shell. It killed her." Clara's chest tightened. "I'm aware." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like you might be foolish enough to try the same thing." I'm not trying to crack anything, Clara said firmly. I'm trying to build my own life within the boundaries of a contract. That's all. Vivian's expression shifted. Surprise, followed by something that might have been respect. A contract. How deliciously practical. No wonder Marcus chose you. He chose me because I was convenient and desperate. Let's not romanticize it.
Fair enough. Vivian set down her glass, leaned in conspiratorially. Then, let me give you some free advice, Clara Hale. The women in this room are going to try to destroy you. They'll smile, invite you to tea, and then gut you with gossip the moment you leave. Don't trust them. Don't confide in them. And whatever you do, don't let them see you weak. I don't intend to. Good. Because weak women don't last long in Ironhaven.
And I'd hate to see you crushed before you've even had a chance to fight back. Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Voices rose, gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara turned to see a man stumbling through the doorway, his face pale, his clothes covered in dust and what looked like blood. "The mine!" he gasped, barely staying upright. "There's been a collapse. North shaft. Men are trapped." The room went silent. Then chaos erupted. Marcus was already moving, cutting through the crowd with brutal efficiency. He reached the messenger in seconds, gripping his shoulder. "How many?" 12. Maybe more. The tunnel's blocked. We need equipment, men, supplies. I'll handle it." Marcus turned, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "Carver, I need your rail crew and every able-bodied man you can spare. Richardson, get me blasting powder and timber supports. Move. Now." Men scattered, shouting orders, grabbing coats. Clara pushed through the crowd, reaching Marcus's side. "What can I do?" He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. "This isn't... What can I do?" she repeated, her voice steel. Marcus held her gaze for a heartbeat. Then he nodded. "Get to the manor. Have Mrs. Brennan prepare every spare room. We'll need space for the injured. Send Tom to gather medical supplies from town, bandages, laudanum, whatever the doctor has. And make sure the kitchens are ready to feed however many men show up." Clara didn't hesitate. "Consider it done." She turned and ran. Bump. The next 12 hours were a blur of chaos and controlled crisis. Clara raced back to the manor, her formal gown traded for practical wool the moment she arrived. She mobilized the household with ruthless efficiency, Mrs. Brennan organizing rooms, Tom riding to town for supplies, the kitchen staff preparing massive quantities of food. By the time the first wagon of injured miners arrived, Hale Manor had been transformed into a makeshift hospital. Clara met them at the door, directing men to prepared rooms, helping the doctor triage the wounded. Blood stained her hands, her dress, the floors. She didn't care. These were Marcus's men, his responsibility, and by extension, hers. She worked through the night, changing bandages, holding down screaming men while the doctor set broken bones, spooning broth into mouths too weak to hold a cup. Exhaustion clawed at her, but she didn't stop. Dawn was breaking when Marcus finally returned, covered in coal dust and grime, his face haggard. Clara met him in the entrance hall, swaying slightly on her feet. "How many?" she asked. "All of them. We got them all out." His voice was raw. 3 won't make it. The rest will live." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she almost collapsed. Marcus caught her elbow, steadying her. "You should rest. So should you." They stood there in the gray morning light, 2 people held together by exhaustion and something neither of them could name. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He didn't let go. His hand remained on her arm, warm and solid, anchoring her. "Thank you," he said quietly. Clara looked up at him, seeing past the grime and exhaustion to something raw and real beneath. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together, remember? Contract or not." Marcus's expression shifted, something cracking in the armor he wore so carefully. But before he could respond, Mrs. Brennan appeared. "Sir, the doctor needs you." The moment broke. Marcus released Clara's arm, stepped back. "We'll talk later." He disappeared down the hallway, leaving Clara alone in the entrance hall. She looked down at her ruined dress, her blood-stained hands, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was no longer just survival. This was war. And Clara had just proven she knew how to fight. The wounded miners stayed for 3 days. Clara moved through the manor like a general commanding a battlefield, directing staff, managing supplies, sitting vigil with men who woke screaming from nightmares of crushing darkness. She slept in snatches, ate standing up, and never once complained. The household watched in silence, their earlier contempt shifting into something closer to grudging respect. Even Mrs. Brennan softened, offering Clara tea without being asked, quietly praising her efficiency to the other staff. But it was the miners themselves who changed everything. On the third day, as the last of them prepared to leave, a grizzled foreman named Daniels approached Clara in the entrance hall. He held his cap in his scarred hands, his expression serious. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from coal dust and gratitude. "The men wanted me to tell you something." Clara set down the inventory list she'd been reviewing. "Yes? We know what people been saying about you, that you're some gold digger who trapped Mr. Hale, that you don't belong here." Daniels met her eyes directly. "They're wrong. You risked your own safety to help us. You didn't have to. You could have stayed in your fancy rooms and let someone else handle it. But you didn't. You got your hands dirty. You cared." Clara's throat tightened. "I only did what anyone would—" "No, ma'am. You did what you would do, and we won't forget it." Daniels glanced back at the other men gathering their belongings. "If anyone gives you trouble, you tell us. You've got friends now, real ones." He shook her hand with surprising gentleness, then led his crew out into the cold morning. Clara stood in the doorway, watching them disappear down the road, and felt something shift inside her chest. She'd won something more valuable than Marcus's approval or society's acceptance. She'd won loyalty. Behind her, a voice spoke quietly. "That was well done." Clara turned to find Marcus standing at the base of the stairs, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted, human, almost vulnerable. "I didn't do it for praise," Clara said. "I know, that's why it matters." Marcus descended the last few steps, stopping just out of reach. "The garden. You can keep working on it." Clara blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "The chain is gone. Work on it if you want. I won't stop you." His jaw tightened as though the words cost him something. You were right. Letting it rot wasn't honoring her memory. It was just cowardice. It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever heard from him. Clara nodded slowly. "Thank you." Marcus turned to leave, then paused. "The society women. They're going to be worse now. You humiliated them at the reception by proving you're not useless. They'll retaliate. Let them." Something almost like a smile touched his mouth. "You're either very brave or very foolish." Probably both. This time, he did smile. Small, fleeting, but real. Then he walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the entrance hall with her heart beating just a little too fast. The war wasn't over, but the battle lines had shifted. Winter arrived with brutal efficiency. Snow fell in heavy sheets, burying the roads, isolating the manor from Ironhaven proper. The temperature dropped until water froze in the pipes, and frost painted intricate patterns on every window. Clara had never experienced cold like this, the kind that seeped into your bones, that made every breath visible, that turned the world into a hostile, frozen wasteland. But she refused to hide inside. The garden became her refuge. Even in the killing cold, she worked alongside Tom, planning spring plantings, repairing structures, slowly bringing the space back to life. The fountain was functional now. Tom had found a stonemason willing to work for reasonable rates, and though it sat empty for winter, Clara could already imagine it filled with water, surrounded by roses. Marcus watched sometimes from his study window. She could feel his gaze on her back, heavy and unreadable. He never joined her, never spoke about it, but the chain stayed off the gate. One afternoon in late November, Clara was in the library reviewing estate ledgers when Mrs. Brennan appeared, her expression more troubled than usual. "Ma'am, there's a situation." Clara looked up. "What kind of situation?" "Several families from the workers' settlement are sick. Fever, chills, difficulty breathing. The doctor thinks it might be influenza." Mrs. Brennan's mouth thinned. "It's spreading fast." Clara's stomach dropped. Influenza in a frontier settlement, during winter, with limited medical supplies. It could wipe out entire families. How many sick so far? At least a dozen, including children. Clara closed the ledger, her mind already working through logistics. We need to set up a quarantine. Keep the sick separated from the healthy. I'll need supplies, blankets, firewood, medicine. Can we get the doctor out there? The roads are nearly impassable, ma'am, and the doctor is already overwhelmed treating cases in town. Of course he was. Clara stood, pacing to the window. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, turning the world white and hostile. Going to the settlement would be dangerous. Getting stuck there, potentially getting sick herself, it was a risk that made no practical sense. But she could still hear Daniel's voice. You've got friends now. Those people had stood by her, had defended her. She couldn't abandon them. Prepare a wagon, Clara said. Food, blankets, medicine, firewood, everything we can spare. Mrs. Brennan stared at her. Ma'am, you can't be thinking of going yourself. Why not? Because it's dangerous, because you could get sick, because… The housekeeper stopped, choosing her words carefully. Because it's not your responsibility. Yes, it is. Clara turned to face her. These people work Marcus's mines, live on his land, depend on his industry. That makes them our responsibility. If he won't help them, I will. Mr. Hale would never allow. Then he can stop me himself. Clara swept past her, heading for her rooms to change into warmer clothes. She was halfway up the stairs when Marcus's voice cut through the air like a whip. What the hell do you think you're doing? Clara stopped, looked down. Marcus stood in the entrance hall, still in his riding coat, snow melting on his shoulders. He must have just returned from town. I'm going to the workers' settlement. There's an outbreak. They need help. Marcus's expression darkened. Absolutely not. It wasn't a request for permission. She continued up the stairs. Marcus followed, his boots heavy on the wood. Clara, stop. She reached the landing, turned to face him. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't go. Because it's dangerous. Because you could get sick. Because if you die out there, it accomplishes nothing. And if I stay here safe and warm while families die from lack of basic supplies, what does that accomplish? Marcus's jaw clenched. It keeps you alive. For what? To sit in this cold house playing the dutiful wife to a man who doesn't even want one? To waste my life being decorative and useless? Clara stepped closer, her voice rising. Those people defended me when your society friends tried to tear me apart. They stood by me. I won't abandon them now just because it's convenient or safe. This isn't about convenience. It's about survival. You go out there, you'll get sick, you'll die, and He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Clara stared at him. You what? Marcus looked away, his control fracturing. I can't lose someone else to my own stupidity. I won't. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Clara felt her anger drain away, replaced by something more complicated. Marcus, this isn't your fault. The epidemic isn't your doing. No, but if I let you go and something happens… His voice cracked. I should be the one going, not you. You have business in town tomorrow, rail contracts that can't wait. You told me yourself. Clara reached out, surprising herself by touching his arm. Let me do this, please. Marcus looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back up at her face. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd lock her in her rooms or forbid her outright. Instead, he exhaled slowly. I'll send Tom with you. And Daniels. You don't go alone. Agreed. And you take every precaution. Masks, gloves, distance from the sick. If you start showing symptoms, you come back immediately. I will. Marcus held her gaze for a long moment, then quietly, come back safe. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. Clara nodded, her throat tight. I will. The workers' settlement was worse than Clara had imagined. Rows of small, hastily built houses lined muddy streets already half buried in snow. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, desperate streams. The air smelled like coal dust and sickness. Tom and Daniels flanked Clara as she stepped down from the wagon, both men tense and watchful. They'd brought supplies, blankets, food, medicine, firewood. But Clara could already see it wouldn't be enough. A woman emerged from the nearest house, her face gaunt, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. Mrs. Hale? Clara recognized her, Mary,
one of the miners' wives who'd come to the manor to thank her after the rescue. "Mary, how bad is it?" "Bad. We've got 8 families sick now, 3 children." Mary's voice cracked. "We're doing what we can, but without medicine, We brought supplies. Show me where they're needed most." For the next 6 hours, Clara worked without stopping. She distributed blankets, helped build fires, spooned broth into mouths too weak to eat. The sick lay in cramped rooms, burning with fever, their breathing labored and wet. Clara had seen illness before, but never like this, never so concentrated, so desperate. She wore the mask Tom had insisted on, kept her gloves on, washed her hands in scalding water between houses. But she knew the precautions were barely adequate. By the time night fell, exhaustion had seeped into her bones. Tom found her sitting on the steps of the last house, her head in her hands. "Ma'am, we should go, before the roads get worse." Clara looked up at the settlement, at the flickering lights in windows, at the smoke rising into the dark sky. "We can't leave them like this. We brought what we could. It's more than they had before. It's not enough." "No," Tom agreed quietly. "But it's what we've got." Clara stood, her legs shaking. She was about to follow Tom back to the wagon when a man stumbled out of one of the houses, wild-eyed and frantic. "Please," he gasped. "My daughter! She's burning up. She can't breathe. Please, you have to help her." Clara was moving before she could think, following him into the small house. Inside, a girl of maybe 7 lay on a narrow cot, her face flushed crimson, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her mother knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "She's getting worse," the woman sobbed. "I don't know what to do." Clara knelt on the other side of the cot, pressing her hand to the girl's forehead. The heat was shocking, far too high, dangerous. "We need to cool her down, now." Clara turned to Tom. "Cold water, clean cloths, move." They worked frantically, bathing the girl's burning skin, trying to bring the fever down. Clara spooned medicine between the child's cracked lips, praying it would be enough. Hours passed. The fever wouldn't break. The girl's breathing grew more labored, her small body convulsing. Clara felt panic rising in her chest. She didn't know what else to do. She wasn't a doctor. She was just... "Please," the mother whispered, gripping Clara's hand. "Please don't let her die." Clara looked into the woman's desperate eyes and made a decision that defied all logic. "Tom, get the wagon ready. We're taking her back to the manor." Tom stared at her. "Ma'am, if she's contagious, then we isolate her, but she needs real medical care. The doctor can come to the manor easier than we can get her to town." Clara lifted the girl carefully, wrapping her in blankets. "We're not leaving her to die." The journey back was a nightmare. The wagon lurched over frozen ruts, each jolt making the girl whimper. Clara held her close, trying to keep her warm, praying they'd make it in time. By the time they reached the manor, Clara's arms were numb, and her own body was starting to feel wrong, too hot, too heavy. She pushed the feeling aside. Marcus met them at the door, his face going pale when he saw the bundle in Clara's arms. "What happened?" "She's dying. We need the doctor. Now." Marcus didn't argue. He sent a rider immediately, then helped Clara carry the girl to one of the spare rooms. Mrs. Brennan appeared with clean linens, hot water, and a disapproving expression that softened when she saw the child's face. "Poor lamb," she murmured. The doctor arrived just past midnight. He examined the girl, administered medicine, and pulled Clara aside with a grim expression. "Her lungs are badly inflamed. The fever's dangerously high. I've done what I can, but..." He shook his head. "The next few hours will tell." Clara nodded, her vision swimming slightly. "Thank you." The doctor left. Clara returned to the girl's bedside and didn't move. She sat through the night, changing cool cloths, monitoring breathing, whispering reassurances to a child who might not even hear her. Her own body ached, her head throbbed, but she didn't stop. Marcus came in once, near dawn. He stood in the doorway, watching Clara work with an expression she couldn't read. "You should rest," he said quietly. "I'm fine." "You're not. You can barely stand." Clara looked up at him, and the room tilted slightly. "I can't leave her." Marcus crossed the room, crouched beside her chair. He pressed his hand to her forehead, and his expression darkened. "You're burning up." "I'm fine,"
Clara repeated, but her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. Clara. I'm fine. She tried to stand to prove it, but her legs buckled. Marcus caught her before she hit the floor. The last thing Clara heard before darkness swallowed her was his voice, raw with something that sounded terrifyingly like fear. Get the doctor back. Now. Fever dreams came in waves. Clara surfaced and sank, caught in a tide she couldn't control. Sometimes she was in the garden, planting roses that bloomed and died in seconds. Sometimes she was in her childhood home, watching her father sign away everything they owned. Sometimes she was drowning in cold water while Marcus stood on the shore, unreachable. Voices filtered through the delirium. Mrs. Brennan. Her fever's too high. We're losing her. The doctor, keep cooling her down. It's all we can do. And Marcus. Always Marcus. His voice was the anchor she clung to, even when she couldn't understand the words. He was there. She could feel his presence, solid and real, refusing to let her drift away completely. Once she surfaced enough to feel his hand gripping hers. Don't you dare, he was saying, his voice rough and broken. Don't you dare leave me, not like this, not because you were too stubborn to stay safe. Clara tried to answer, but the darkness pulled her back under. Time lost meaning. She floated in and out of consciousness, each breath a battle, each heartbeat uncertain. And then, slowly, the fever broke. Clara woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. Her body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry, weak, hollow, but alive. She turned her head and found Marcus sitting in a chair beside her bed. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his clothes rumpled as though he'd slept in them for days. But when he saw her eyes open, relief flooded his face so powerfully it was almost painful to witness. Clara. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. How long? Her voice came out as a rasp. 5 days? Marcus leaned forward, his hand still holding hers. You've been unconscious for 5 days. The doctor said... He stopped, his jaw working. We thought we'd lost you. Clara absorbed this slowly. 5 days. The girl. Is she... alive? You saved her. Her fever broke 2 days ago. She's going to recover. Marcus's grip on her hand tightened. Because you risked everything to help her. Because you're too goddamn stubborn to let anyone die on your watch. Clara tried to sit up. Marcus stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. Don't. You're still weak. I'm fine. You almost died, Clara. You are not fine. His voice cracked. Do you have any idea what these last 5 days have been like? Watching you burn with fever, knowing I couldn't do anything to stop it, knowing it was my fault for letting you go. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Marcus's control finally shattered. I should have stopped you. Should have gone myself. Should have what? Locked me in my room? Forbidden me from helping people who needed it? Claire's voice grew stronger despite her exhaustion. I made my choice, Marcus. I knew the risks. I went anyway because it was the right thing to do. And you almost died for it. But I didn't. I'm here. I survived. She squeezed his hand, drawing his gaze back to hers. I'm not her, Marcus. I'm not your first wife. I'm not going to break because life gets hard. I'm not going to disappear just because you're afraid of losing me. Marcus stared at her, something raw and desperate in his eyes. I can't. He stopped, started again. When she died, I swore I'd never let anyone get close again. Never care enough that losing them would destroy me. And then you walked into my life with your spine and your pride and your absolute refusal to be invisible. And now... He broke off, looking away. Clara's heart was pounding. And now what? Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. And now I can't imagine this house without you in it. Can't imagine my life without you challenging me, defying me, making me remember what it feels like to care about something other than business and control. He looked back at her, his defenses finally completely gone. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between the garden and the mind collapse and watching you fight for everyone but yourself, He stopped, the words caught in his throat. Clara waited, barely breathing. I love you, Marcus said finally, the words torn from somewhere deep. And it terrifies me. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable and irreversible.
Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. Marcus, you don't have to say anything. I know this wasn't the arrangement. I know I have no right to ask for more than what we agreed. But I needed you to know. If you died without knowing, his voice broke. I couldn't have survived it.
Claire reached up with her free hand, cupping his unshaven jaw. You stubborn, impossible man. I've been falling in love with you for weeks. I just thought I was alone in it. Marcus froze, his eyes searching hers. I love you, Clara said, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. I love your strength, your brilliance, even your cold control. I love the man beneath the armor, the one who cares so much it scares him, the one who sat beside me for 5 days refusing to let me go. For a heartbeat, Marcus didn't move. Then he closed the distance between them, pressing his forehead to hers with a reverence that made her chest ache. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not, but you have me anyway. Marcus laughed, a broken, beautiful sound. Then he kissed her, gentle and desperate, and full of everything they'd been too afraid to say. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was breathless for reasons that had nothing to do with illness. So, she said, her voice shaky, where do we go from here? Marcus smiled, truly smiled, warm and real and absolutely devastating. Wherever you want, as long as we go together. Clara nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Together then. Outside, snow continued to fall. The world was still harsh, still unforgiving. But inside Hale Manor, something had shifted irrevocably. The walls had finally come down. Clara spent the next week confined to bed under strict orders from both the doctor and Marcus. She hated every minute of it. Her body was healing, strength returning in slow increments, but her mind chafed against the forced inactivity. There was work to be done. The workers' settlement still needed help. The garden required preparation for spring. The household accounts needed reviewing. Lying in bed while the world moved on without her felt like suffocation. Marcus, to his credit, understood her restlessness even if he refused to accommodate it. The world will still be here when you're well, he told her on the third day, settling into the chair beside her bed with a stack of correspondence. And if you try to get up before the doctor clears you, I'll have Tom nail your door shut. Clara glared at him. You wouldn't dare. Try me. But his eyes were warm, the threat undercut by the small smile playing at his mouth. It was strange, this new intimacy between them. Marcus still worked brutal hours, still carried the weight of his empire on his shoulders. But now he brought that work to her room. He sat beside her bed reviewing contracts, asking her opinion on business decisions, sharing details of his day that he'd never offered before. And at night, when the household slept, he moved from the chair to the edge of her bed, holding her hand in the darkness while she drifted in and out of sleep. They didn't speak about the future, about what their confession of love meant for the cold contract that had brought them together, but the shift was undeniable, irrevocable. On the 7th day, the doctor finally cleared Clara to resume light activity. She was dressed and downstairs before Marcus could finish his breakfast. He looked up from his coffee, eyebrows rising. You're supposed to be taking it easy. I am. This is easy. Clara poured herself tea, settled into the chair across from him. I'm just sitting, in a different room. Marcus studied her over the rim of his cup, something like fondness softening his expression. You're impossible. You've mentioned that before. It bears repeating. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning light filtering through the dining room windows. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, leaving the world buried but bright. Clara could see the garden from here, dormant now, but waiting. Come spring, it would bloom. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway, her expression more animated than Clara had ever seen it. Ma'am, there are visitors from the settlement. Clara set down her teacup. Show them in. A moment later, Mary entered, flanked by 3 other women Clara recognized from her work during the epidemic. They looked nervous, clutching their shawls, clearly uncomfortable in the Manor's formal dining room. Clara stood, ignoring Marcus's warning look. Mary, ladies, please sit. Would you like tea? No, ma'am, we won't take up your time. Mary twisted her hands together. We wanted to thank you, properly, for what you did. You don't need to thank me. Yes, we do. Mary's voice strengthened. You risked your life for us. For our children, you didn't have to. You could have stayed safe and sent supplies with someone else. But you came yourself. You got your hands dirty. You saved Emma's little girl." The other women nodded, murmuring agreement. Mary reached into her pocket, pulled out a small cloth bundle, and set it on the table. "We made this for you. It's not much, but we wanted you to have something." Clara unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside was a handkerchief, plain white linen, embroidered with delicate wildflowers and careful, painstaking stitches. Each woman's work was visible in the different sections, some more skilled than others, but all done with obvious care. Clara's throat tightened. "It's beautiful. We wanted you to know that we see you, ma'am. We know what people in town been saying, that you're after Mr. Hale's money, that you don't belong here, that you're playing at being one of us." Mary's expression hardened. "They're wrong. You earned your place, not just here in this house, but with us. You're one of ours now. And if anyone tries to say different, they'll have to go through all of us first." The words hit Clara with unexpected force. She looked at these women, weathered, work-worn, survivors of the harshest kind of life, and saw something she'd never expected to find in this cold frontier city. Acceptance, belonging, family. "Thank you," Clara managed, her voice thick. "This means more than you know." The women departed, leaving Clara standing in the dining room with the embroidered handkerchief clutched in her hands. Marcus rose from his chair, moved to stand beside her. "They're right, you know." Clara looked up at him. "About what?" "You earned this, all of it." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with unexpected tenderness. "I brought you here as part of a transaction, a cold arrangement to solve practical problems, but you turned it into something more. You made yourself essential, not because I needed a wife, but because this place needed you." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just did what felt right." "That's exactly my point. You could have stayed distant, uninvolved, protected. Instead, you threw yourself into the hardest, messiest parts of life here. You fought for people who had nothing to offer you in return. And now," he gestured toward the doorway where the women had disappeared, "now you have something I've spent years trying to build and never quite achieved." "What's that?" "Loyalty that isn't bought. Respect that isn't forced. Love that isn't transactional." Marcus's voice softened. "You've accomplished in 3 months what I couldn't manage in a lifetime." Clara set the handkerchief down carefully, turned to face him fully. "That's not true. The miners respect you. The household staff fear you, yes, but they're also fiercely loyal. You've built something powerful here, Marcus. Built on control and money, not on genuine connection." He shook his head. "I've been doing everything wrong. Running this empire like a machine, treating people like assets, keeping everyone at a distance because I was too afraid of being hurt again. And then you arrived and showed me a different way. I didn't do anything special. You did. You cared, openly, vulnerably, without armor." Marcus took her hands in his. "I want to try that. I want to be the kind of man who deserves what we have now, but I don't know how." Clara squeezed his hands. "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do." Marcus pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead with a reverence that made her chest ache. "Partners," he echoed. "I like the sound of that." They stood together in the morning light, two people who'd started as strangers in a cold transaction and somehow found something real. The moment was broken by rapid footsteps in the hallway. Tom burst into the dining room, his weathered face flushed with urgency. "Mr. Hale, ma'am, you need to come, now." Marcus's expression shifted instantly to alert. "What happened?" "It's Richard. He's at the gate with a dozen men. Says he's got legal papers. Claims he's taking control of the estate." Clara felt ice flood her veins. "What?" Marcus was already moving, striding toward the entrance hall with Clara close behind. Tom followed, his explanation tumbling out in urgent fragments. "Says there's some problem with your marriage contract. That it wasn't properly filed or witnessed or something. Says the whole thing's invalid, which means you're not legally married, which means I have no claim to the estate if something happens to Marcus," Clara finished, her mind racing. "And as the closest male relative, Richard would inherit everything." They reached the front door. Through the windows, Clara could see Richard standing at the iron gates with a cluster of men, lawyers by the look of them, carrying document cases and wearing expressions of professional neutrality. Marcus's jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists. That bastard. He's been planning this. Can he actually do it? Clara asked. Can he invalidate our marriage? If there's a legitimate legal flaw, yes. Marriage contracts are complex. If the magistrate who performed the ceremony wasn't properly licensed, or if the witnesses weren't qualified, or if Marcus broke off, swearing under his breath. I didn't check the details closely enough. I was so focused on getting the arrangement finalized that I didn't verify every legal requirement. Clara's mind was working furiously. What happens if the marriage is invalid? You'd have no legal standing, no claim to anything. Richard could force you out, and there wouldn't be a damn thing I could do about it legally. Marcus turned to her, his expression fierce. But I won't let that happen. I'll fight this. I'll hire every lawyer between here and the coast if I have to. That could take months, years. Clara looked back at the men waiting at the gate. By the time it's resolved, Richard could have dismantled everything you've built. Mrs. Brennan appeared, her face pale. Sir, what should I tell them? Marcus was silent for a moment, rage and frustration warring across his features. Then he straightened, his expression hardening into the cold mask Clara had seen the day they met. Tell them I'll be out in 5 minutes, and get my lawyers here. Now. Mrs. Brennan hurried away. Clara grabbed Marcus's arm. Wait. There might be another way. He looked at her sharply. What are you thinking? Richard's entire claim rests on our marriage being invalid, correct? Yes. So what if we remove that variable entirely? What if we dissolve the contract ourselves and create a new one, properly witnessed, properly filed, absolutely airtight? We remarry, today, right now, in front of witnesses who can't be disputed. Marcus stared at her. Legally, that might work. But Clara, it would mean starting over. New contracts, new terms. And if we do it under this kind of pressure, Richard will claim coercion, claim it's still invalid because we're only doing it to block his claim. Let him claim whatever he wants. We'll have the law on our side. Clara's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. But we need to do it publicly, not here at the manor where Richard can claim it was private and suspicious. In town, at the courthouse, with the mayor as witness, with half of Ironhaven watching if necessary. Yeah, you want to make a spectacle of it. I want to make it unquestionable. Clara met his eyes. You said you wanted to be partners, real partners, not just in name. Well, this is what that looks like. We fight this together. We show Richard and everyone else that this marriage isn't just a contract. It's a choice, one we're both making freely and openly. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Then slowly, something like admiration crossed his features. You're brilliant. I'm practical. There's a difference. No, you're brilliant. He cupped her face in his hands. Are you sure about this? Once we do it, there's no going back. No more pretending this is just a transaction. It becomes real in every possible way. Clara didn't hesitate. It already is real. We're just making it official. Marcus kissed her, hard and fierce and full of fierce certainty. Then he pulled back, his expression shifting into something sharp and dangerous. Tom, get the carriage ready. Mrs. Brennan, send word to the courthouse that we need the magistrate prepared for an immediate ceremony, and someone find me the best damn lawyer in Ironhaven. Yes, sir. They scattered to follow his orders. Marcus turned back to Clara. This is going to get ugly. Richard won't go down without a fight. Good. I'm tired of people underestimating us. Marcus smiled, cold and predatory. Then let's show them exactly what they're dealing with. They walked out to face Richard together. The man stood at the gate looking smug and self-satisfied, his expensive coat pristine, his lawyers arranged behind him like a wall of professional intimidation. When he saw Marcus and Clara approaching, his smile widened. Cousin, how lovely to see you. And Clara, or should I say Miss Whitmore, since the marriage seems to have been rather informal. Marcus's voice was ice. State your business, Richard. Gladly. Richard produced a sheaf of papers, waving them with theatrical flourish. It's come to my attention that your marriage ceremony was performed by Magistrate Holbrook. Unfortunately, Magistrate Holbrook's license expired 3 days before your ceremony, which means, legally speaking, he had no authority to marry you, which means your marriage is invalid, which means this estate, in the event of anything happening to you, would revert to me as the next male heir.
How convenient that you discovered this now, Clara said coldly. Richard's eyes glittered. I'm just looking out for the family interests, my dear. Can't have questionable marriages muddying the legal waters, can we? You're not family, Marquis said, his voice deadly quiet. You're a vulture waiting for me to die so you can pick the bones of what I built. Such harsh words. I'm simply ensuring legal propriety. Richard's smile sharpened. Of course, this puts you in rather an awkward position. Your little gold-digger bride has no legal claim to anything. She could be removed from the premises today, unless, of course, you'd like to contest this in court. That would take years, and in the meantime, I'm afraid I'd have to insist on oversight of estate management. For legal protection, you understand. It was a trap, beautifully laid. Contest it, and Richard gets his foot in the door of the business. Accept it, and Clara loses everything. Marquis opened his mouth to respond, but Clara spoke first. You're absolutely right, Richard. The marriage is invalid. Both men turned to stare at her. Clara kept her expression serene. Magistrate Holbrook's expired license is a serious legal flaw. We can't dispute that, so we won't. Richard's eyes narrowed suspiciously. I'm sorry, what? We're dissolving the invalid marriage and performing a new ceremony, today, at the courthouse. With the current magistrate, proper licensing, and public witnesses. Clara smiled sweetly. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. We'll make sure to correct it immediately. Richard's face went red. You can't. That's not. You're only doing this to circumvent my legal claim. We're doing this to correct a legal error, which you yourself pointed out. Clara tilted her head. Unless you're suggesting we shouldn't fix the problem? That seems rather contradictory, Richard. One of the lawyers behind Richard cleared his throat. Actually, sir, if they perform a valid ceremony with proper documentation, that would supersede any claim based on the previous invalid marriage. Richard whirled on him. I'm paying you to help me, not them. I'm simply stating the legal reality, sir. If Mr. Hale and Miss Whitmore enter into a valid marriage contract today, your claim becomes moot. Richard's hands clenched into fists. This is ridiculous. The whole thing is a farce. She's clearly manipulating him. I'm standing right here, Richard, Marquis said, his voice cutting through the other man's bluster. And I'm fully capable of making my own decisions. Clara and I will be married today, properly, legally, publicly, and when we are, you'll have no claim to anything, ever. You're making a mistake. She's using you. No, I used her. I brought her here as part of a cold transaction because I needed a wife and didn't want the complication of actual feeling. But she turned out to be so much more than I deserved. She's brilliant, brave, and completely unwilling to be diminished by men like you or me. Marquis moved closer to the gate, his presence radiating controlled fury. So here's what's going to happen. We're getting married, today. And then I'm going to make damn sure that every legal document, every contract, every piece of paper connected to this estate explicitly names Clara as my partner and heir. Not you, not ever. Richard's face was purple now, rage and humiliation warring for dominance. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You lost. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left. Marquis turned and walked back toward the manor, his arm around Clara's shoulders. Behind them, Richard shouted something vicious and incoherent, but Clara didn't look back. They had a wedding to plan. 2 hours later, Clara stood in the Iron Haven courthouse wearing the same burgundy silk gown she'd worn to the mayor's reception. The building was packed. Word had spread with shocking speed. The Hales were remarrying today, immediately, and it was open to public witness. Miners and merchants crowded the hallways. Society matrons perched on benches with expressions ranging from scandalized to fascinated. Even Mayor Carver had shown up, clearly unwilling to miss the spectacle. Clara saw Vivian Ashford near the front, dressed in emerald green and wearing a smile that was pure approval. Mrs. Brennan stood near the back with Tom and several household staff, their faces carefully neutral but their presence speaking volumes. And near the side entrance, looking furious and humiliated, Richard glowered with his lawyers in tow. The magistrate, properly licensed this time, Clara had verified it herself, stood at the front looking mildly overwhelmed by the crowd. Marquis appeared at Clara's side, dressed in a black suit that made him look both devastating and dangerous. He took her hand, squeezed it gently.
Last chance to run, he murmured. Not a chance, Clara squeezed back. You're stuck with me now. Good. His smile was small but genuine. I was hoping you'd say that. The magistrate cleared his throat. Shall we begin? The ceremony was short, efficient, and utterly binding. This time, when the magistrate pronounced them married, Marcus kissed Clara in front of the entire crowd. A kiss that was neither cold nor perfunctory, but deep and real and absolutely impossible to misinterpret. When they broke apart, the courthouse erupted in applause. Clara saw tears on Mrs. Brennan's weathered face, saw minors cheering, saw society women whispering behind gloved hands, their expressions ranging from envious to grudgingly impressed. And she saw Richard storming out, his lawyers scrambling to keep up, his grand plan shattered beyond repair. Marcus kept his arm around her waist as they turned to face the crowd. Thank you all for witnessing. My wife and I appreciate your support. The way he said, my wife, with pride, with possession, with genuine warmth, made Clara's heart skip. They made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations, shaking hands, navigating the social gauntlet with surprising ease. Clara noticed how people looked at her now, not with suspicion or contempt, but with something closer to respect. She'd earned it. Through the mine collapse, through the epidemic, through fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She belonged here now. Not because she'd married well, but because she'd proven herself worthy of the position. Outside the courthouse, Vivian intercepted them with a knowing smile. Well played, Clara Hale. That was the most dramatic marriage I've seen in years. It wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was meant to be legal. Even better, you humiliated Richard in front of half the city and secured your position without breaking a sweat. I'm impressed. Vivian glanced at Marcus. You chose well, Hale. Don't screw it up. I don't intend to, Marcus said dryly. Vivian laughed and swept away, leaving them standing in the winter sunshine. Marcus turned to Clara, his expression softening. Ready to go home? Home. The words settled into Clara's chest with unexpected warmth. Yes, she said. Let's go home. What? That night, the manor felt different. Clara walked through the halls and saw not a cold fortress, but a place that was becoming genuinely hers. The staff nodded respectfully as she passed. The fires burned warm and bright. Even the shadows seemed less oppressive. She found Marcus in his study, finally catching up on the work he'd abandoned for the emergency remarriage. He looked up when she entered, setting down his pen with a small smile. Shouldn't you be resting? You only just recovered from nearly dying. I'm fine, and I wanted to see you. Clara settled into the chair across from his desk. We need to talk about the estate contracts, the ones you mentioned, making me an explicit partner and heir. Marcus leaned back, studying her. Are you sure you want that responsibility? It's not just a title. It's managing hundreds of employees, overseeing dangerous industries, making decisions that affect entire communities. I know. And yes, I'm sure. Clara met his gaze steadily. I've been reviewing your operations for months now. I understand the business. I understand the people. And I have ideas. Ways to improve working conditions without sacrificing profitability. Ways to invest in the community that will pay dividends in loyalty and productivity. Marcus's eyebrows rose. You've been planning this. I've been paying attention. There's a difference. Clara pulled a folded document from her pocket. Notes she'd been making for weeks. Ideas she'd been too uncertain to share before. The workers' settlement needs better housing, medical care, a school for the children. If we invest in those things now, we'll have a healthier, more stable workforce, which means fewer accidents, less turnover, higher productivity. Marcus took the notes, scanned them with increasing interest. This is actually brilliant. The numbers work out. The social benefit is clear. Why didn't you mention this before? Because before I was just the contract wife. I had no real authority, no standing to make these kinds of proposals. Clara leaned forward. But now I'm your partner. Equal. So I'm asking you to consider these changes seriously. Marcus set down the notes, his expression thoughtful. You're right. All of it. These changes would transform how we operate, make us not just profitable, but genuinely good for the community. He paused. You're going to be better at this than I am. I doubt that. I don't. You see people as people, not assets. You understand that strength comes from building up, not just controlling. Marcus stood, moved around the desk to stand in front of her. I spent years building an empire on fear and power. You're going to transform it into something better, something that actually matters. Clara rose to meet him. We're going to transform it, together. That's the whole point of partnership. Marcus pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. You've said that before. It's still true. Well, you're stuck with me anyway, legal and binding, remember? Clara smiled up at him. Besides, I have plans for that garden, and for this house, and for you. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Marcus laughed, a genuine, warm sound that still felt rare and precious. I wouldn't dream of it. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Clara felt the last vestiges of their cold contract burn away completely. This was real. This was forever. This was home. Spring arrived like a promise being kept. The snow melted in great rushing torrents, turning roads to mud and filling the air with the smell of earth awakening. Clara stood in the garden, her garden now, truly hers, and watched the first green shoots pushing through soil that had been frozen for months. Tom worked beside her, his weathered hands gentle as he placed seedlings in carefully prepared beds. Roses will bloom by summer, he said, his tone carrying quiet satisfaction. She'd be proud of what you've done here. Clara knew he meant Marcus's first wife, the woman whose memory had haunted this place, whose loss had nearly destroyed the man Clara now loved. I hope so, Clara said softly. I never wanted to erase her, just honor what she started. Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. You did more than that, ma'am. You brought it back to life. They worked in comfortable silence until Marcus appeared at the garden gate, still in his work clothes, his expression lighter than Clara had ever seen it in the early months of their arrangement. Mrs. Brennan says lunch is ready, though I suspect if I don't physically drag you away, you'll work through it again. Clara straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. I was just finishing. You were 3 hours ago. But Marcus's tone was amused rather than critical. He'd learned to accept her fierce dedication to the projects she cared about, even as he worried about her driving herself too hard. They walked back to the manor together, Marcus's hand resting at the small of her back. The gesture had become natural over the winter months. Small touches, casual intimacy, the physical language of two people learning to exist in the same space without armor. Inside, the household hummed with purposeful activity. Mrs. Brennan supervised new staff. The manor had expanded operations significantly since Clara's plans for worker improvements had been implemented. The kitchens now fed not just the household but provided meals for families in the settlement during lean times. A small medical clinic operated out of the manor's east wing 3 days a week, staffed by a doctor Marcus had hired specifically for community care. The changes had been gradual but profound, and the results were undeniable. Productivity in the mines had increased, accidents had decreased, and the loyalty Marcus had always bought with fear and money was now being freely given. Over lunch, Marcus spread architectural drawings across the table. The contractors say they can break ground on the school next week. If weather holds, it should be finished by autumn. Clara studied the plans with satisfaction. The school had been her priority, a real building with proper classrooms, supplies, and a teacher they'd recruited from back east. Children in the settlement would finally have access to education beyond what exhausted parents could manage after brutal workdays. It's perfect, she said. Have you shown these to the settlement council? Tomorrow. I wanted your approval first. Marcus looked up at her, something warm and open in his expression. This was your vision. I'm just making it happen. We're making it happen. Together. Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. Together, he agreed. The moment was interrupted by rapid footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, Daniels burst into the dining room, his face flushed with urgency. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, you need to see this. They followed him to the entrance hall where a crowd had gathered. Through the open doors, Clara could see a line of carriages approaching. Expensive, elegant, clearly carrying people of importance. Marcus's jaw tightened. What now? But as the carriages drew closer, Clara recognized the lead vehicle. That's the governor's seal. Marcus turned to her, surprise flickering across his face. What would the governor want here? They were about to find out. The carriages stopped at the manor's entrance, and a distinguished man in his 60s stepped out,
Governor Harrison himself, accompanied by several officials and what looked like journalists. Marcus moved forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Governor, this is unexpected." Harrison smiled, extending his hand. "Hale, Mrs. Hale, forgive the intrusion. I've been hearing remarkable things about the work you're doing here. I wanted to see it for myself." Clara exchanged a glance with Marcus. This felt like a test, or a trap. "You're welcome to look around," Marcus said carefully, "though I'm not sure what exactly has drawn your attention. Your worker welfare programs, for one. The medical care, the housing improvements, the school." Harrison gestured to his companions. "We've been getting reports from multiple sources, mine inspectors, health officials, even some of your competitors. What you're building here is unprecedented in the frontier territories." One of the officials, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "I'm Inspector General Morrison. I oversee industrial safety across the Western Territories. The accident rate in your mines has dropped 40% in the last 6 months. That's statistically remarkable." Marcus's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "We've implemented new safety protocols, better equipment, more training, and better working conditions," Clara added. "Healthier, more secure workers make fewer mistakes. It's not complicated." Morrison's gaze sharpened on Clara with something like respect. "Simple in theory, difficult in practice. Most mine owners see worker welfare as wasted expenditure." "Most mine owners are short-sighted," Clara said bluntly. "The initial investment pays for itself within a year through increased productivity and decreased losses." Harrison laughed, surprised and genuinely delighted. "Mrs. Hale, I see why you've made such an impression. May we see these improvements firsthand?" Clara looked at Marcus. He gave a slight nod. "Of course," she said. "Though I should warn you, it's muddy, cold, and not particularly glamorous." "I didn't come for glamour, Mrs. Hale. I came for the truth." Over the next 4 hours, Clara and Marcus led the governor's delegation through the settlement, the medical clinic, the construction site for the school. They toured the mines themselves, Marcus explaining the new safety equipment, Clara discussing the worker feedback systems they'd implemented to identify problems before they became disasters. The journalist took notes frantically. Inspector Morrison asked pointed technical questions that Clara answered with precision, and Governor Harrison watched everything with keen, assessing eyes. Finally, as the sun began its descent, they returned to the manor for refreshments. Harrison settled into a chair in the parlor, accepting whiskey from Mrs. Brennan. "I'll be direct, Hale. What you've built here is exactly what the frontier territories need. Industry that doesn't destroy the people who fuel it. Wealth that lifts communities instead of crushing them." "That's Clara's doing more than mine," Marcus said, his hand finding hers. "I was content to run a profitable empire. She insisted on making it a sustainable one." Harrison turned his attention to Clara. "I've been dealing with labor disputes across the territories for 3 years. Strikes, violence, entire operations shutting down because workers and owners can't find common ground. What you've done here proves there's another way." "Common sense isn't revolutionary," Clara said. "Treat people with dignity, invest in their well-being, and they'll invest in your success. It's mutual benefit, not charity." Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale, would you be willing to document your methods, create a framework that other operations could implement? The territorial government would compensate you for your time and expertise." Clara felt Marcus's surprise beside her. This was more than approval. This was recognition, official, public acknowledgement that what they'd built mattered beyond Ironhaven. "I'd be honored," Clara said carefully, "but I'd want guarantees that any framework would prioritize worker welfare, not just owner profit." "Naturally." Morrison's expression was approving. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you." Harrison stood, setting down his glass. "Hale, Mrs. Hale, thank you for your time. I suspect we'll be seeing much more of each other. What you're building here is the future of the frontier. I intend to make sure that future spreads." After the governor's delegation departed, Clara and Marcus stood on the front steps watching the carriages disappear into the evening light. "Did that actually just happen?" Clara asked quietly. "I think so." Marcus turned to her, wonder and pride warring in his expression. "Clara, do you understand what this means? Official territorial endorsement, press coverage,
Other operations will have to follow our model or risk looking like the cruel, outdated systems they are.
We change things, Clara said, the realization settling over her like sunlight. We actually change things. Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You change things. I was just smart enough to listen. What?
Word of the governor's visit spread through Iron Haven like wildfire. Within days, Clara found herself invited to speak at the mayor's business council, then at the Women's Charitable Society, then at a territorial conference on industrial development. The society matrons who'd sneered at her months ago now competed for her attention. Business owners sought her advice. The same people who'd called her a gold digger now praised her brilliance, her innovation, her remarkable transformation of Hale Enterprises. Clara accepted the recognition with grace, but no small amount of irony. She hadn't changed. She'd been this person all along, capable, intelligent, determined. They just hadn't bothered to look past their prejudices until someone important told them she mattered. But there were genuine victories too. Mary and the other settlement women invited Clara to a gathering in the new community center, a building that had been part of the housing improvements. The space was simple but warm, filled with families Clara recognized from her work during the epidemic. Emma, the little girl Clara had saved, ran up and wrapped her arms around Clara's waist. "Mrs. Hale, look, I'm all better." Clara crouched down, returning the hug with fierce affection. "I can see that. You're strong."
Mama says I'm strong because you made me strong. Emma's expression turned solemn. She says you saved my life.
Clara's throat tightened. "You saved your own life by being brave. I just helped a little." Emma's mother approached, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "More than a little, ma'am. We can never repay what you did. You don't need to repay anything. You're family now." The words were true. Somewhere along the way, this community had become Clara's in a way that transcended obligation or duty. These people were hers, and she was theirs, bound by shared struggle and earned trust. The gathering was warm and genuine, so different from the stilted society functions Clara had endured. Here, she wasn't being judged or assessed. She was simply welcomed, celebrated. When she returned to the manor that evening, she found Marcus in the garden. He'd taken to spending time there himself lately, drawn by the peace Clara had cultivated in the space his first wife had loved. "How was the community meeting?" he asked. "Good. Real." Clara settled beside him on the stone bench. "They're happy, Marcus. Not just surviving, actually happy. Building lives worth living." Marcus took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "Legacy. What we leave behind when we're gone." He looked out at the garden, at the roses beginning to bud, at the fountain running clear and bright. "My father built an empire on ruthlessness. No compassion, no mercy, just power and profit. I followed that model for years, built something impressive but hollow. And now," Clara prompted gently, "now I want to build something that matters, something that makes lives better, not just bank accounts larger." Marcus turned to her, his expression open in a way it never had been before their confrontation with mortality. "I want our legacy to be measured in educated children, healthy families, communities that thrive instead of just survive." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "We're already building that because of you. You showed me it was possible, that strength doesn't have to come from control, that real power comes from lifting people up, not keeping them down." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I want to expand what we're doing here, not just in our operations, but across the territories. Make this the standard, not the exception." "That's ambitious. I married an ambitious woman. She's rubbing off on me." Clara laughed, leaning into his shoulder. "You were ambitious long before you met me. I just redirected it." "Best decision I ever made," Marcus said quietly. "Letting you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The garden bloomed around them, a testament to resurrection, to refusing to let grief and fear turn beauty into ruin. Clara thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived at this cold manor, desperate, broken, convinced she was entering a prison. Instead, she'd found a battlefield, and then a home, and finally, a purpose worth fighting for. Summer arrived in full force, bringing heat and growth, and the culmination of months of careful planning. The school opened on a bright June morning to a crowd of nearly 200 people, children lined up in their best clothes, eyes wide with excitement and nervousness. Parents clutched handkerchiefs, overwhelmed by the gift of education their children were receiving. Clara stood beside Marcus on the small stage they'd erected, looking out at faces she knew, miners who'd nearly died in the collapse, families she'd helped during the epidemic, women who'd embroidered wildflowers on a handkerchief to show their gratitude. Governor Harrison stood at the podium, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. What we celebrate today is more than a building. It's a declaration that every child, regardless of their parents' occupation or economic status, deserves the chance to build a better future. The Hales have proven that industry and compassion aren't enemies, they're partners. This school is evidence of what's possible when we choose to invest in people, not just profit. Applause erupted, genuine and thunderous. Harrison stepped back, gesturing to Clara. "Mrs. Hale, would you do the honors?" Clara moved forward, her heart pounding. She held the ceremonial scissors, facing the red ribbon stretched across the school's entrance. But before she cut it, she turned to address the crowd. "When I arrived in Ironhaven, I was a stranger. A woman with no power, no position, nothing but determination to survive in a place that didn't want me." Her voice carried clear and strong across the assembly. "I was called a gold digger, an opportunist, someone who didn't belong and never would." She saw heads nodding, people who remembered those whispers, who'd perhaps spread them themselves. But this community taught me something important. Belonging isn't given, it's earned. Through showing up when things are hard, through fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, through refusing to accept that cruelty and exploitation are the price of progress. Clara looked at Marcus, saw pride and love shining in his eyes. This school exists because we chose to believe that success doesn't require sacrificing human dignity, that wealth built on the well-being of others is stronger than wealth built on their suffering, and that legacy matters more than profit. She turned back to the crowd. "This school is for your children, for their futures, for the world they'll build when they grow up in a community that values education, health, and opportunity. May they do better than we did. May they build something even greater." Clara cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted in cheers. Children rushed forward, eager to explore their new classrooms. Parents embraced, tears flowing freely. And standing in the middle of it all, Clara felt something settle deep in her chest. This was what she'd been fighting for. This moment, this transformation from transaction to family, from survival to legacy. Marcus pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "You're extraordinary." "We're extraordinary," Clara corrected. "Together." "Together," he agreed. Autumn painted the world in fire and gold. Clara stood in the garden one cool October morning, surveying the results of a year's worth of labor. The roses bloomed in magnificent profusion, deep red, pale pink, pristine white. The fountain sparkled in the sunlight. Stone pathways wound through carefully tended beds, bursting with late-season flowers. It was beautiful, alive. Everything it had been meant to be before grief had locked it away. Behind her, she heard footsteps on the gravel. She turned to find a woman standing at the garden gate, young, elegantly dressed, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I'm sorry to intrude," the woman said. "The housekeeper said I might find you here. I'm Sarah Whitfield. I knew Marcus's first wife, Lillian. We were friends." Clara's breath caught. She'd heard the name spoken only rarely, always in hushed tones. Marcus still struggled to talk about her directly, though the sharp edges of his grief had softened over the months. "Please, come in," Clara said, gesturing to the garden. Sarah entered slowly, her eyes taking in every detail. Tears tracked down her cheeks. "She'd love what you've done here. Lillian always said this garden was her heart made visible. When Marcus locked it away after she died, I thought that heart would stay buried forever." "I didn't know her," Clara said quietly. "I was afraid I was disrespecting her memory by changing things." "No." Sarah turned to face her, fierce conviction in her voice. "You honored her by refusing to let beauty die just because she did. Lillian would have wanted this. She'd have wanted someone to love this garden, to bring it back to life, to show Marcus that joy doesn't have to end just because loss happened.
Clara felt tears burning in her own eyes. I've been so worried about living in her shadow. You're not in her shadow. You're in your own light. Sarah reached out, taking Clara's hands. Lillian was wonderful, but she couldn't save Marcus from himself. She tried, and it broke her. You didn't try to fix him. You just lived so fiercely and brilliantly that he couldn't help but follow your example. That's not disrespecting her memory. That's completing what she started. The words released something Clara hadn't realized she'd been holding. Permission, perhaps. Or absolution. Thank you, she whispered. Sarah smiled through her tears. Thank you for bringing my friend's garden back to life, for making Marcus remember how to be human, for proving that love can have second chances. After Sarah left, Clara walked slowly through the garden, trailing her fingers over rose petals, feeling the solid warmth of sun-heated stone beneath her feet. This place was hers now, not stolen from Lillian's memory, but built upon the foundation she'd laid. A testament to the truth that beauty could survive tragedy, that love could grow from the ashes of loss. That night, Clara told Marcus about Sarah's visit. They lay together in the darkness of their shared bedroom, another transformation from the cold, separate quarters of their contracted beginning. She said Lillian would have approved, Clara said softly. Of the garden, of us. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think she would have. Lillian believed in second chances, in resurrection, in refusing to let grief have the final word. His arm tightened around Clara. I wish she could have met you. You two would have been friends. I wish that too. They lay in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other through desperation and transformed it into something magnificent. Clara? Yes? I need to tell you something about why I really married you. Clara's breath caught. They'd never fully addressed this, the true reason behind Marcus's cold contract, beyond the surface explanation of needing a wife for appearances. Marcus sat up, pulling Clara with him so they faced each other in the moonlight streaming through the windows. After Lillian died, I went to a dark place. I built my empire bigger, harder, more ruthless. I convinced myself that if I just controlled enough, accomplished enough, proved myself powerful enough, the pain would stop. But his voice was rough with old anguish. But it didn't. It just made me hollow. Clara took his hands, holding tight. Richard started circling, Marcus continued, making moves to take control if anything happened to me. And I realized that if I died, everything I'd built would go to him. He'd dismantle the operations, destroy the workers' livelihoods, turn everything into quick profit with no regard for human cost. So you needed an heir, Clara said, understanding dawning. Someone who'd inherit instead of him. Yes. But more than that, I needed someone strong enough to actually fight him, to protect what I'd built, even from beyond the grave. Marcus looked at her directly. I chose you because you were desperate enough to agree, but proud enough not to be crushed by the arrangement. I thought I was buying a placeholder, a legal barrier between Richard and my legacy. But you were so much more than that. You took my cold empire and transformed it into something worth protecting. You made me remember why I built any of this in the first place, not for power, but to create something that mattered. Marcus cupped her face in his hands. I married you as a transaction, but I fell in love with you because you refused to be anything less than yourself. Fierce, brilliant, uncompromising. Clara kissed him, pouring a year's worth of struggle and triumph and hard-won love into the gesture. When they broke apart, she said, I came here expecting prison. I found partnership, purpose, home. And I came to this marriage expecting nothing, Marcus said. I found everything. Winter returned, closing the circle of a full year. On a bright December morning, Clara stood at her bedroom window watching snow fall over the garden. It was dormant now, sleeping under a blanket of white, but she could see the careful preparations she and Tom had made. Come spring, it would bloom even more magnificently than before. Behind her, Marcus emerged from his study with a thick document folder. The new contracts are finalized, he said, setting them on the table. Full partnership structure, equal decision-making authority, inheritance provisions that make you the primary heir with ironclad protections against any challenge. Clara turned from the window. Richard's going to be furious. Richard can rot. He had his chance to be family. He chose ambition over loyalty.
Marcus moved to stand beside her at the window. Besides, he's been unusually quiet lately. I suspect he's finally accepted defeat. Clara wasn't so sure, but she let it go. They'd face whatever came together. There's something else, Marcus said, pulling a smaller envelope from his jacket. I've been invited to speak at the Territorial Industrial Summit in the capital next month, about our worker welfare model. That's wonderful. They want you to speak too. In fact, they specifically requested that you be the primary presenter. Marcus handed her the invitation. They want to hear from the architect of the programs, not just the man who signed off on them. Clara read the formal invitation, feeling a mix of pride and trepidation. Public speaking to territorial leaders, being recognized as an expert in her own right, it was validation beyond anything she'd imagined when she first arrived at this cold manor. I'll do it, she said. We'll present together, show them what partnership actually looks like. Marcus smiled, that rare, genuine expression that still had the power to make Clara's heart skip. Together. Always. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway, her usual severity softened by what might have been pride. Ma'am, there's a delegation from the settlement here to see you. They say it's important. Clara exchanged a glance with Marcus, then followed the housekeeper downstairs. In the entrance hall, Mary stood with a group of 24 people, men, women, children Clara recognized from her work over the past year. They looked nervous but determined. Mary, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, ma'am. Mary stepped forward holding a large wrapped package. We wanted to give you something, a proper thank you for everything you've done. Clara's throat tightened. You don't need to thank me. Yes, we do. You changed our lives, Mrs. Hale. Our children have education, our sick have medical care, our families have safe housing. You fought for us when you didn't have to. You risked everything. Mary held out the package. This is from all of us. Clara unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a quilt, massive, intricate, clearly the work of many hands. Each square depicted a different scene: the school opening, the garden restoration, Clara working in the settlement during the epidemic, the mine rescue, moments large and small from the year that had transformed them all. And in the center, stitched in careful lettering. For Clara Hale, who taught us that strength comes from caring. Clara couldn't speak through the tears streaming down her face. Mary moved closer, her own eyes wet. You came here as a stranger, an outsider everyone said didn't belong. But you proved that belonging isn't about where you come from. It's about what you do when you get there. You're one of us now, forever. The crowd murmured agreement, faces reflecting genuine love and gratitude. Clara looked at these people, her people, and felt the last piece of her old identity fall away. She wasn't the desperate woman who'd arrived in Ironhaven with nothing but pride and determination. She wasn't even just Marcus's wife or a frontier society figure. She was Clara Hale, partner in a business empire, architect of social change, protector of the vulnerable, member of a community that had accepted her not because of her name or wealth, but because of her actions. She belonged, completely. Finally, Marcus appeared at her shoulder, his hand finding hers. Together they faced the crowd, two people who'd started as strangers in a cold transaction and built something far greater than either could have achieved alone. Thank you, Clara managed finally, for accepting me, for teaching me what real community means, for showing me that home isn't a place. It's the people who stand with you when everything's hard. Mary smiled. You showed us the same thing, ma'am. That's why we'll always stand with you. Spring returned like resurrection, like promise, like proof that death and winter couldn't have the final word. Clara stood in the garden on the anniversary of her arrival, surrounded by roses in full bloom. The fountain ran clear and bright, catching sunlight in 1,000 sparkling droplets. Pathways she and Tom had restored wound through beds bursting with color and life. Marcus found her there, as he often did. He'd taken to working fewer hours, spending more time with her, with the community they'd built, with the life they'd created from the ruins of grief and isolation. 1 year, he said, slipping his arm around her waist. 1 year ago, you arrived expecting prison. Look what you built instead. Clara leaned into him, surveying their shared domain. We built it. Together. You started it. I just had the sense to follow. In the distance, Clara could see the school, children playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. She could see the settlement transformed from desperate survival into thriving community. She could see the manor, no longer a cold fortress, but a home that welcomed rather than isolated. And she could see the future, a legacy built not on power and control, but on compassion and shared strength. A future where their work would ripple outward, transforming other communities, proving that industry and human dignity weren't enemies, but partners. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Accepting my cold proposal? Marrying a man who promised you nothing but security?" Clara turned to face him fully, cupping his jaw with one hand. "Never. You offered me survival. I built myself a life. We built ourselves a partnership worth more than any contract could capture." Marcus kissed her, slow and tender, a promise renewed. When they broke apart, Clara looked back at the garden, at the beauty rescued from abandonment, at the legacy they'd built from transaction and desperation. "Your first wife planted this garden," Clara said softly. "She put her heart into every flower, every path, every stone. And when she died, you locked it away because you couldn't stand the pain of remembering." Marcus nodded, old grief flickering across his face, but no longer consuming him. "But gardens don't stop being gardens just because the planter is gone," Clara continued. "Beauty doesn't die just because loss happens. And love, real love, it doesn't replace what came before. It builds on the foundation, grows from the same soil, reaches for the same light." She gestured to the blooming roses, the restored fountain, the pathways they'd rebuilt together. "This garden is a testament to three things: your first wife's vision, your willingness to let go of grief's grip, and our determination to prove that endings can become beginnings." Marcus pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. "I loved her. I'll always love her. But you taught me something she couldn't, that loving what came before doesn't mean you can't love what is. That honoring the dead means living fully, not drowning in what's gone." Clara nodded against his chest. "We're not erasing her memory. We're proving she was right, that beauty matters, that love matters, that building something worth protecting is the only legacy that endures." They stood together in the garden as spring sunshine poured down like benediction. Two people who'd walked into a transaction and emerged with a love that transformed everything it touched. In the years that followed, the Hale model spread across the frontier territories. Other operations implemented worker welfare programs, built schools, invested in community health. The changes were gradual but profound. A shift in how industry understood its relationship to the people who fueled it. Clara spoke at conferences, wrote frameworks that were adopted territory-wide, became known not as Marcus Hale's wife, but as Clara Hale in her own right, an expert, an innovator, a force that refused to accept that progress required human sacrifice. Marcus remained her partner in every sense, supporting her work, championing her vision, standing beside her as they built an empire that measured success not in profit alone but in lives improved and communities strengthened. The garden bloomed every spring, a living testament to resurrection and refusal. Children from the settlement played among the roses, their laughter proof that beauty could survive tragedy, that love could have second chances, that endings were sometimes just beginnings in disguise. And in the manor that had once been a cold fortress, Clara and Marcus built a life that honored all that came before while reaching boldly toward what could be. They proved that strength came from caring, that power built on compassion lasted longer than power built on control. That legacy was measured not in wealth accumulated but in lives touched, futures secured, and communities transformed. What began as a transaction became a testament. What started as survival became a story of resurrection. What seemed like an ending became the beginning of something far greater than either of them could have built alone. In the harsh frontier world where winter killed the weak and the strong survived through ruthlessness, Clara and Marcus chose a different path. They proved that survival wasn't the highest goal, thriving was. That strength wasn't about domination, it was about lifting others up. That love, when it was real and earned and fought for, could transform not just two people but an entire world. Years later, when Clara stood in that same garden surrounded by grandchildren who knew her story, how she'd arrived with nothing, survived everything, and built a legacy that changed the frontier forever, she would tell them the truth she'd learned in those first hard months. "I came here expecting to endure. Instead, I learned to thrive. I thought I was entering a prison. I found a purpose. I believed I was being used in a transaction. I discovered I was part of a transformation. She would look in the roses blooming around her, at the fountain sparkling in sunshine, at the evidence of a life fully lived and a love fully earned. Never accept less than what you deserve. Never let fear keep you from fighting for what's right. And never ever underestimate what you can build when you refuse to be diminished by the world's expectations. The garden would bloom around her, proof of resurrection, promise, and the truth that beauty, real beauty, couldn't be locked away. It would always find a way back to the light. And in the end, that was the legacy that mattered most. Not wealth, not power, but the transformation of a cold transaction into a love that changed everything, a partnership that built empires of compassion, and a story that proved survival was just the beginning. The rest, the thriving, the transformation, the legacy that would outlast them both. That was what happened when two people chose to be more than what they'd been offered, when they refused to accept limitation, when they built something together that neither could have created alone. That was the story of Clara and Marcus Hale. Not a fairy tale, not a romance, but something harder won and far more valuable. A partnership forged in the harshest conditions, tested by fire and loss and fear, and ultimately transformed into a legacy that proved love, real, earned, fought for love, could indeed change the world.